I'm going to read from Luke 24. This is the gospel reading from this last Sunday. And just to set the tone, this was right after the two disciples that were walking on the road to Emmaus when Jesus opened their eyes through the breaking of the bread. They came back and they told the apostles, and then it goes into this section. While they were still speaking about this, Jesus, he stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." And so right there was a sound. They heard him speak. But get this. They were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. So the sound goes in the ear, boom, hits the emotional brain, and they're freaked out. Even though they spent 3 years with him, they knew who he was, they recognized his voice, they spent so much time with him, they let their emotional brain take over, they weren't thinking with their rational brain, and it says right here, they were startled and terrified. Then he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do questions arise in your hearts?" Sometimes you can think of your heart as kind of your emotional brain. And so Jesus was recognizing that they were thinking with their emotional brain, not their rational brain. And that's why he asked the question. And then he says, "Look at my hands, look at my feet, that it is myself. Touch me and see." Again, he's using those senses, sight, sound. They heard him speak. Now he wants them to touch his hands and his feet. He says, "Touch me and see, because it is I. Touch me, because a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you can see I have." And as he said this, he showed them his hands. He showed them his feet. While they were still incredulous for joy and were amazed, he asked them, "Have you anything here to eat?" Now, why on earth would he do that? But if you think about it in the context of these five senses, in how we gather information, how we learn, how we come up with ideas, now he's asked for a piece of fish. They hand him a piece of baked fish. Now, I'm sure it had a smell. And then they watch him eat the fish. Now, when you eat fish, there's going to be obviously a taste. Now, the apostles didn't taste the fish, but they were certainly familiar with what a baked fish tasted like. And so he says, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of baked fish. He took it and ate it in front of them. Now, sometimes when you read things 1,000 times, it takes 1,001 times to read it and click for it to make sense. And I've been very familiar with this passage for a long time. But it wasn't until this past Sunday that I read this in light of this talk coming up that it dawned on me that this is exactly what Jesus is doing. He is creating for them the ideas that's going to take them into their future mission, their future ministry when he leaves. So this is what he says next. He said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and in the prophets and Psalms must be fulfilled." Now, these apostles, prior to meeting Jesus and through their 3 years of spending time with him, they were familiar with Moses' laws. They were familiar with the Psalms. They were familiar with all the stories. They had read all those things, but it had not clicked. And Jesus is taking them softly and slowly and gently through this process, using these five senses, until finally it says in verse 45, "Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures." It was at that point, after using these five senses, after taking them slowly through this process, after allowing them to jump through their emotional brain and get over the shock of this to get to their rational brain with all the information they had gleaned throughout their development spiritually, throughout the time that they spent with Jesus, that he opened their minds, they understood, and they were ready and prepared to go forward and spread the message, spread the gospel, take over in Jesus' place, because Jesus knew that he wasn't going to be there very long. And I just think that it's something that we take for granted, our sight, our sound, our hearing, all these things. But this is how we gather our information. This is how we learn. This is how we develop. This is how we grow. And I wish that I would have knew about this when I tried to answer my son-in-law when he asked me, where do ideas come from? But I think that there's an excellent parallel between how our brains develop, how our minds develop, how we take this information, and how we go through these stages of development until one day the light clicks, the idea comes on, we understand, and our minds are open.